All right. Hello and welcome in. We are going to start our webinar now. This is Brandy speaking, and I'll be the presenter. And I suppose you're all here today to learn about the CAEL speaking parts of the test. So let's launch in. I'll go over the housekeeping rules, and then I'll ask you a few questions about yourselves so I can get to know you a little bit to really help you out with your studies. So I'll mention first that we keep the microphones muted throughout the sessions, but we will use the Zoom chat box to communicate. So can we test that out right now? Would you like to just say a quick hi in the Zoom chat? I want to know that you can hear me okay. So I'm sort of testing out my microphone, but we're also practicing knowing where to put our questions throughout the session. So I'll wait until we get the hellos coming in. Okay, there we go. Hello, hello back at you. I will also comment that you notice where you're typing your messages. If you could make that blue button say everyone, that means everyone online can see what you have to type, which would be ideal. If you're only addressing your messages to the hosts and panelists, I am the only person that can see your questions and comments. So it would be lovely if we could all support each other today. And if you've got a question, surely somebody else has the same question. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm going to be asking you lots of questions today as well as we go through our practice. So you're welcome to place your ideas and answers in the same spot there at the Zoom chat. All right, so we've just done a tech check. Everything looks good. If something freezes on your own computer screen throughout the session, the first thing I would recommend you do is let us know about that in the Zoom chat. If it's just your system, though, the best advice I'll give you right now is to log out of Zoom and log right back in again. And that should reset things for you and have you carry on with the lesson. Now, of course, you can take notes today as we go through the material, but I think honestly, if you participate in that Zoom chat box and follow along, you're even welcome to take screenshots of any slides you find very useful. I think that should be enough for now to help you remember the speaking tips. And within the next 24 hours, we will email you with 3 links to help you continue your studies at home. So the first link that will arrive in your email inbox is that will take you to a survey. And this part's completely optional. If you want to give feedback, of course, you're more than welcome to do so. You don't have to, totally up to you. The second link will open up a pack of study materials. And that pack is going to summarize the speaking strategies we're discussing today. I've got 5 different speaking sample responses delivered by past students who took the CAEL test themselves. And we're going to be analyzing them together in session today. So you will receive a transcript of these 5 responses as well in your study pack. So it gives you a great opportunity to go back and review on your own time later on when you're fresh. Last but not least, the third link in that email will take you directly to our YouTube channel where we keep one master copy recording of all of our free webinars. So if you click on that link, it'll open up a recorded version of the CAEL 301 session, which we're beginning now. So if you can't stay for the 2 hours, that's fine. You can log out and simply rewatch what you've missed in the recording. All right, so I'll quickly introduce myself and then I'd like each of you to do the same in the Zoom chat. So my name is Brandy and I am an online instructor for the CAEL test. I've been teaching for over 25 years now total, mostly working about 20 to 21 years of my teaching career has been spent working with adult students, primarily who are learning language skills, English language skills, but at all levels. So I've worked with beginner level literacy groups, right up to high school completion, right up to about the first year university level, which is what your CAEL test does. It's an academic test. So welcome one and all. I've been teaching for CAEL about 5 years now, give or take. I'm from Ontario, by the way. I grew up in North Bay. It's a small city, right? About 4 hours driving north from Toronto, but I currently live in Vancouver, which is in British Columbia. And if you're on the West Coast like I am right now, it's a beautiful day outside. It's supposed to be 16 degrees Celsius today, and the sun is already shining. So I'm very, very lucky with the weather forecast today. How about the rest of you? Kindly let me know where you're from and where you live now. Is anybody else on the West Coast like me? All right, looks like Rain. I think, Rain, you've been here before, have you not? I recognize your name. I think you've taken other webinars with us. I remember as soon as you mentioned you are a veterinarian. Yeah, that seems to be becoming a more and more popular field, at least as far as the CAEL test is concerned. So you're in good company. We tend to get lots of people who are going through in that field of work. All right. And you are from Brazil. I think I remember that too. Oh, you live in Florida though. So you would be on, I think is that the Eastern time zone? You're at least 3 hours ahead of me. So I think it's after lunch. And I'm assuming Florida is sunny and hot. I don't know. It's been ages since I've been there, but hopefully it's a nice day for you. What about the rest of you? Where are you from? Where are you now? Let us know in the Zoom chat. If you could let me know as well what brings you to CAEL. So again, some of us are taking CAEL because we want to study at a particular school that we picked out. And that's what the CAEL test is all about. It allows you to enter into a Canadian university or college to continue a program of studies. Some people, though, can also take CAEL for professional designations. So that's partly why I'm asking. If I know what you're going to do with your score, it allows me to help support you just a little bit better. And it looks like we've gotten a table from, you are in Montreal right now. Well, that's great. I've not yet been to Montreal, but trust you me, it's on my list. And someday I hope to get there. And the rest of you, if you feel so inclined, can also share in our Zoom chat to let us know what you're doing. Sakine is mentioned, also a veterinarian. Again, I'm not surprised. That seems to be the most common profession these days of people taking CAEL. And you're in Toronto. All right, Toronto it is. So welcome in. We're all in different places, looks like, in different time zones. I will mention this. I'm showing you on screen right now what's called an academic success bundle. And I just thought I'd mention it now before I forget later on in the session. So I don't know if any of you have already booked your CAEL test or not, but when it comes time to actually book the test on the online website, if you enter this code, it says CAEL 25. So for the year 2025, when you enter that code, you're going to save 25% off the registration cost of your test to begin with. And then you're going to receive a whack of free study products that would normally cost money in our online bookstore. So you'll get 5 free practice tests along with your registration. So those, of course, will help you study at home. You'll also have access to what's called the Accelerate program. It's an online course that will help you with your academic skills. And there's also another program or product, I guess, called the Practice Test Plus. So again, it's a really good deal. Again, I mention it now in case we forget, or in case some of you log off a bit early. Note this down, CAEL 25, for, discount on the test registration, and of course, all of these free study products. So that's great to know as well. Okay. Oh, perfect. And before we continue, I hope you've all noticed the note that Rain has put in the Zoom chat. It looks like one of your friends has already got the score that she needed on her CAEL test. So that is wonderful. I'm very happy to hear that. Rain, please pass on our congratulations to your friend on our behalf. I always love to hear those success stories too. And if you've got a month before your own test, I think you've got some time to prepare. So let's get underway here with the speaking test for sure. Here's what we're going to do today. I will quickly introduce what your whole CAEL test looks like. We'll talk briefly about how it's scored, and then we're going to get right into the speaking task overview. There are 5 speaking questions that you will complete on the whole CAEL test. We will be examining all 5 of those today. So we have different types that are called independent speaking, and we've got other questions that are called integrated speaking. So we'll cover that in today's session. And at the end, again, I'll show you more information about those study products in the CAEL bookstore. All right. The CAEL test itself, we call it CAEL, and we spell it this way because CAEL is an acronym that stands for the Canadian Academic English Language Test. So, of course, the word Canadian is important. Most of you so far anyway in our Zoom chat have indicated you will be studying and working in Canada. So that's the whole point of this test. And then the academic piece is really important. Academic skills require higher level critical thinking and more development. This is not your day-to-day language communication test, as you'll see soon. All of the CAEL parts of your test are going to be delivered right on the computer, and that includes the speaking sections that we're talking about today. So you can imagine yourself sitting in front of the computer. For CAEL, you have the option of taking the test in the testing center or at your home computer, depending where you live in the world. Either way, you're going to be wearing a headset, and that's how you'll complete the listening components. But also there will be a microphone attached to your headset. You will record your speaking responses into that microphone, and it's the recordings you make that are sent out to the raters for assessment. And these are human raters, so you're aware. So you never face a person that is examining and giving you a score on your speaking. It's basically you in front of the computer but it's the recordings you make. That's how we do the speaking test here for CAEL. And the questions or the content, I guess, that you will be speaking about and working through on the reading and listening components, etc., and writing, they're mostly integrated. So for instance, you might read a passage and then be asked to speak about something you've learned. So that's one example of integrating or combining different language elements to either understand meaning or produce meaning. And the topics you'll be reading about or listening to are going to come from an arts or science-based background. So you've already mentioned a few of you now, veterinary studies, that's what your career is. So that could be, wouldn't it be nice, if that was an actual topic on one of the test passages that you're reading? You never know, it could be. So stay tuned for that. Again, we've talked about this. Mostly you would use CAEL for studies purposes. All Canadian institutions, all major ones anyways, do accept the score for CAEL, just so you're aware. So that's reassuring. And again, there's a whole list on our website that tells you which professional associations accept the score. So veterinary studies is one. We've listed CICC, which has to do with immigration consultancy on the slide here, as that used to be the main reason, or the big most popular career field, I guess, that a lot of my test takers used to go into, but now we've had a shift and it's veterinary studies. Anyway, by the time you're done this test, you yourselves are going to have a better understanding of your readiness to progress. So if we want to be successful, if we start a program of study at school, we have to have a minimum requirement of language capability in order to be successful there. So that's what this test is designed to do. It gives you the confidence that you have the skills necessary to proceed. And of course, it will let the institution or the employer to whom you're using this score to apply also understand your readiness to proceed. So I mentioned earlier about your testing centers. So we've got a very happy test taker here on the left. I wonder if you'll all be so happy and smiley when you take CAEL. I hope so. But here's an example of that headset and that microphone attached to the headset that I mentioned earlier. Again, if you book in a testing center, you can see what you might expect there. So there could be anywhere from usually about 10 to 30 people in the test center at any one time. It just depends on who else has booked the same location and the same time frame that you have. But as you can see, there will be some sort of a privacy shield separating you from the people beside you. So that's going to keep you focused on the work that you're doing. If you're at home, well, of course, imagine yourself sitting at your desk or your kitchen table with your computer in front of you. But same thing, you'll still have the headset on and the the microphone as well. So if you do live in one of these 13 countries, you have the option of booking the test to take it from home. If you do that, I'll let you know on the registration form online. The program you would book is simply called CAEL Online. I know that's kind of funny because the whole test is done online, but CAEL Online refers to the at-home test. Whereas if you book just CAEL in a testing center, that's where you'll see the locations of the testing centers listed. So I know one of you is from Florida. So yep, USA is on this list. So you have the option of taking the test from home, and the other ones have mentioned locations so far in Canada. So that checks out too. Again, it's completely up to you. If you are comfortable at home and you've got your Wi-Fi is strong enough, it's not going to crash, your computer system is up to date as well to support the platform, then that's an option. If you would prefer having the security of a testing staff member nearby, in case there are issues that come up while you take the test, you might be further inclined to book in a center. But that's a completely personal decision that you'll need to figure out for yourself. Anyway, here's your scoring chart, I guess we'll call it. If you look at the very bottom, the entry level or low beginner communicator with academic skills would be a band 10 or a 20. And then we count by tens all the way up to the top ranks of this chart. So if you achieve a band 80 or a band 90, you are considered an expert communicator in academic language skills. And that's actually quite a challenging skill to achieve, even for people who speak English as a first language. Because although this is a language test, you also need to use critical thinking skills in order to produce your answers, etc. So it does take practice, and that's why you're all here, presumably. I believe, just from lots of you taking veterinary pursuits and studies, I believe your minimum score is a band 70. Is that right? Have you already looked into it for yourself? Oh, Rain says a 60. Is it really 60 for the veterinarian? Okay, maybe I'm mistaken. Again, I have a good memory, but sometimes there are so many programs. At any rate, my takeaway is whatever your own purposes for taking CAEL, you're going to need to make sure that you understand exactly what score you need personally. So Rain's already written in here to say band 60, Natebo's saying you'll need a band 70, and this is ideal. As you can see, you all might have a different goal that you're pursuing, and that's normal. It all depends on where you are going to apply. So it's the individual school or individual employer, we'll call them, that sets their minimum requirements. So do your research, figure out what you need, and then at least you'll have something to aim for as you take this test. I'll say that most institutions ask of you a band 70. And if you look here at what band 70 is all about, it means you've already got adept communication and academic skills. And in simple, plain English, all that means is you've got a very strong foundation. So you can understand the gist of what you're reading about or listening to, and you can make yourself understood by speaking and writing. But it might indicate there are still some limitations or some areas that require a little bit more development to bring you up to speed. And that's normal. When we start out in a new career field or at a school, we're not expected to be perfect or top notch right away. Over time, of course, our skills get stronger and will increase. So that's sort of the rationale behind that. Anyway, your whole test it's a major exam. It's about a 3-hour test. You have up to 3.5 hours should you need that full time to answer all these questions. But the test itself is divided into 5 sections, as you can see, or 5 parts. The speaking test right up top, part 1, only has speaking questions. This is the only part of your test that doesn't combine other skills. But as soon as you get to part 2 and all the way down to part 5, you'll notice those little red brackets there that we've linked together, different skill sets. So it's a reminder that we're now integrating different language elements. So part 2 is all about reading and then speaking about what you've learned. Part 3 is all about listening and then speaking about what you've learned there through the lecture. Parts 4 and 5 both contain your reading and listening passages, but here you're going to be writing about something you've learned using the source material. So that's the entire test in a nutshell, as we say. Whenever you read or listen, which will happen from parts 2 to 5, you have a different topic. So some of these, remember, will be arts-based and others will be science-based. So there should be a good variety on the test. And we do run webinars that get into each and every part of this test. So if you've seen CAEL 201, for instance, we focus only on part 1 of the CAEL test, and then so on. CAEL 202 is just part 2 and down. CAEL 204, we combine parts 4 and 5 together because they both discuss reading, listening, and writing. So those would be the shorter workshops or the shorter webinars to take. The one we're doing right now, all about CAEL 301, called Speaking. This is one of our full-length webinars. It's 2 hours because we get into all the speaking sessions. All right, here's a small sample of just the topics that you could encounter. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's here just to give you an idea of what you might expect. So perhaps in a reading passage, maybe you're looking at an arts-based topic, and that one could all be about political science, let's just say. And then perhaps when you get on to your first listening exercise, maybe that lecture is all about biology, which is a science-based background, and so on. So the idea here is you don't have to have any background knowledge about these topics, but you do need to have language skills that are strong enough that you can understand what you're reading about or listening to in order to answer the questions. So with that in mind, let's get underway. We are going to look at these 5 speaking questions. So we place them in red so you can see where they occur. Part 1 is fairly straightforward. It's just 3 speaking questions in a row. And then in part 2 and 3, the last question of each section is a speaking question. And we'll listen to actual CAEL test takers give us examples of these answers here today. So in part 1, this is the left-hand side of this chart. We call these 3 answers you'll deliver independent speaking because you're just speaking. You're not reading, listening, or writing. It's just speaking. The first 2 questions are going to be about yourself, and they generally connect to a topic about education. So I would strongly recommend to each of you, before you even take this test, start thinking back to your own high school experiences. Even if you've done some college or university already, it would be great if you could review for yourself the classes you've studied, what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, perhaps the skills that you've learned, etc. You won't yet know exactly what the questions will ask you about, but having a general understanding that they're going to connect somehow to education, as it's an academic test, having these ideas in the foreground of your mind is going to help you think of those ideas quicker on the test itself. So that would be my best tip to you. The third and final question of part one is going to give you a visual, sort of like a graph. It could be a bar graph, a line graph, etc. So you can't really prepare for it in the sense that you don't know the topic until you take the test, but you'll want to review how graphs are structured. This test, and we'll do an example, you'll see it does require you to analyze the information that you're looking at. So do be ready for that. For each question, you will have some prep time. So you'll have either 30 seconds or a full minute to read through the question and start thinking of your ideas. And then when the prep time is finished, you'll hear an automated voice speak through the headset to you, and it will ask you to start speaking. Literally, it says, start speaking now. And you'll speak either for 1 minute, 90 seconds, or 2 minutes. The computer instructions always tell you how long you'll need to speak. So that takes care of those first 3 questions. And part 1 is completed very quickly. It takes about 10 minutes to get through those first 3 questions. And then you move on to part 2, which begins the integrated section. So first you're going to read a passage, and then you'll have be given a question. You need to speak and answer that question based on the reading. So you'll have a minute to think about the ideas you want to pull out of the reading passage, but then you'll be asked to speak for 2 minutes. And this is a much more formal response. It's kind of like giving a little presentation in front of a group, if you can imagine that. So you're taking ideas from the reading passage. You're not expected to have all sorts of life experience based on the topic. And then the final question will be part 3, but listening this time. So you listen to your lecture first and answer questions there. Then you speak about something you've learned. And that will also be a 2-minute response. I think the academic speeches are definitely a little bit more challenging, I would argue. They're longer and also more involved than in part 1, where you're speaking primarily about yourself, and that tends to be easier. So bear that in mind. Anyway, when you start each question, you're going to have a little instruction screen that looks exactly like this. You'll notice there's no timer on the screen. So you can breathe a sigh of relief. You haven't officially started the speaking test yet, but through your headset, you're going to hear someone read the instructions to you. So I'll do that just this once to simulate what your experience would be in the testing room. So the voice through the headset, a recording, says, your professor asks you a question. You have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to answer the question. Your preparation time starts on the next page. So you would probably already know the structure of the test before you took it, but in case you forgot, it's helpful to note what the prep time will be and then the speaking time before you even see the question. So you can now do one of 2 things. You can sit here and wait patiently for a short amount of time, let's just say 10 seconds, at which point the test will then automatically move you forward to the next screen where the speaking question is revealed. If it were me, though, I would just get right to it. There's a next button on the top of every screen. So by clicking next, you're going to move yourself just a little bit more quickly to the actual testing question. And if you use the next button in that fashion, you'll get through the entire CAEL test a little bit more quickly than sitting and waiting for the computer to advance. That's just a tip. You do need to realize, though, there's no back button, as you can see. So once you click next, you are moving forward. So please be ready for that. You also do not get to carry with you the extra time. Every single screen, just like I'm showing you here, this is question number 1 for speaking. They all have their own preset number of seconds for the prep time and the speaking time. And the first thing I think you should look at when you begin a new speaking question is the timer. Just remind yourself what to expect. So by knowing you've got to fill 1 minute of talking time, it's going to help you plan an appropriate number of details here. So the question here says, what do you want to study at university and why? Can we answer that question? Not answer it per se, but just sort of brainstorm a couple of ideas in our Zoom chat right now. So 2 of you online have already said you're looking to enter the career of veterinary science, I guess. So I assume that that would be your subject. That would be an easy one. So if you're currently going to be studying or perhaps already have, I would pick something that's true to you. What about the other people that are not studying for veterinary science? Is there a subject matter that would be appealing? If this was your actual question right now and you only had 30 seconds to think it through, you need to make a decision really quickly. So what subject matter would be easy for you to explain? I'll give you just a few moments and see if I can coax you to type a couple of ideas in the Zoom chat. And here's the trick. If you're not actually going to be studying anytime soon, you have to imagine that you are. You have to answer this question one way or the other accurately. So some of you actually might be making this up as if you were going to study. So if it were me, I would just pick a subject that I'm very well versed in. For me, I'm an English teacher. I'm not going to be studying anytime soon, as I did my studies way back in the 90s, and I'm already working with no plans right now to upgrade. So I would just say English because I, for 25 years now, have been teaching English. So I would frame my answer, though. I still have to imagine that I'm going to be studying English in the fall and so on. That's how I would frame this. But I can still use a lot of experiences from my own past in my career to explain why I would want to study that. Okay, and we're getting some other great ideas here. So we do have some immigration consultants in the house. Excellent. Yeah. So base this on your real life, and I think it'll help you out. So again, we won't take the time to get into why you've all chosen the fields that you have, but just assume for 60 seconds, I think if you came up with 3 reasons why you wanted to study that field. So for veterinarians, I mean, you're going to be working with animals. So I would assume maybe one of the reasons you could say, oh, I plan to study veterinary science at McGill University in September. Do you see how I'm adding in some specific details here? I'm telling you where I'd study and when. Those are extra details that make the answer a lot more interesting, and they're going to help your score. So you set that up, and that's the easy part. You might just say, because I love animals, and more to that, animals are such an important part of most families' lives. It's almost like an extended family member. So by keeping these pets healthy and safe, I bring joy to the families who own them. And I enjoy giving back to the community. So they're just off the top of my head. I'm not a veterinarian and I don't plan to become one, but off the top of my head, using a reason like that would make sense to answer a question like this. So by developing that and taking a good 10 to 12 seconds to really explain that one reason, I'm already looking good for time. If I could come up with 2 more reasons, I probably would then be finished at about the 60-second mark. So that's your goal here as you're speaking. Look at the time, try to give an answer that's interesting and on par. You're already going to know the way your score is being assessed before you come in to take CAEL. But in case you forget, over on the left-hand side, you notice 2 bulleted points that are reminding you, give details and examples. So that's what I've just demonstrated. I just added in, I picked a university, McGill University came to mind. And again, studying in September of this year. So whatever details make sense, add them in. It really makes the response more interesting. And you're always going to be evaluated on your content, how accurate and precise it is, as well as your language use. So do bear that in mind. Some of you might want to take notes. If you're in the testing room, you're given paper and pen. So that's straightforward. And you could jot down some notes in the prep time and speak to them when you're recording. If you're at home, though, you cannot have anything on your table or your desk. There will be a proctor. And a proctor is a person that has eyes on you through the camera of your laptop or your computer. So they can verify for security purposes that it's just you, a clean table surface, and your computer equipment. So because you cannot have paper or pen anywhere nearby, you're going to use an online notepad, and it's called Scratchpad. So it's really easy. You just click on the Scratchpad button, wherever it is on your computer screen, and it's going to open up. We'll pretend this is your piece of paper. It's called Scratchpad. Again, it's a little movable notepad. You can move it around your computer screen. You can minimize it, whatever you need to do. But you can type a couple of ideas there and have that facing you as you speak. Again, from home, if it's helpful. You don't even have to use it, but it's there if you need it for sure. Okay, and the way your score is going to be assessed, let's take about 3 or 4 minutes and just make sure we all know what we need to practice for speaking at home. So you'll maximize your scoring here on the test. Those first 4 elements under delivery skills speak literally to your speech presentation. So consider what you need to do with your voice to be very easily understood by the listener in any language, frankly, not just English. So of course, we have to pronounce the words clearly. If we don't have clear pronunciation, how on earth will people understand us? So pronunciation is key. We need to speak loudly enough to be heard, but also at a comfortable volume. So not too fast and not too slow. That just takes practice. I think the fine tuning here can be challenging, but we want to speak from beginning to end without interrupting ourselves. So try your best to cut down on the number of times you interject. It's okay if you say or every now and then. I think that's natural, but we don't want to interject in the middle of every sentence because it starts to interrupt the flow. So consider that. If you get stuck and you don't know what to say next, try your very best to just think of something, even if it's different from the idea you just finished talking about, but keep your speech moving forward. You don't want to sit there quietly for 5 or 10 seconds because then you're interrupting the flow and it's hard for the listener to follow what you're saying. So again, intonation, rhythm, all of these speech elements that we use on a day-to-day basis will be assessed on the test itself. Right below that, numbers 5 to 9 speak about your language use. So it's an academic test, which means we don't want to use overly casual or slang expressions. I would not be using idioms on my CAEL test. I would want to prove to the raters that I can speak in that appropriate formal register. So bear that in mind. The words that we choose as we speak in the academic setting should be more precise and specific and upper level. So try to avoid vague language usages. Do not use words like thing or stuff. Those words really tell us nothing. So the more precise and focused your word choice is, and of course it has to be accurate, the meaning has to be clear, that's what's going to help your score here. Your sentence structures, as well, as this is academic, we should at this level be able to produce more complex structures. So rather than just speaking in these short, simple sentences, like we might in day-to-day language with friends, in an academic presentation, our sentences are much more focused, but they're longer. We're connecting ideas together using a variety of conjunctions and transitions. Try your best not to just use and or and, so. Those words are so basic. Your grammar might be correct, but if you can learn other ways to connect ideas that are much more interesting. So in a formal context like CAEL, I would be using words like therefore, moreover, furthermore. These are much more formal, as I say, and good ways to connect ideas. Over on the right-hand side, numbers 10 down to 16, these are all about the content of your responses. So once again, the more interesting your details are, the more well-developed and supported they are with examples, the better your score is going to be. We must take care to include only details that answer the question. So we don't want to start talking about different topics, as that's definitely going to confuse the listener. And the order in which we present our ideas will be helpful for the listener to follow. So we usually give a brief introduction. You might have a bit of a hook, say something to interest the reader, but then you get right to the focus of the response. And then the rest of the answer will be spent giving a main idea with supporting details, a second main idea with your examples. You might have time in a 2-minute response to give a third main idea with details, etc. And then usually we offer a brief conclusion at the end to summarize or emphasize the point that we were just expressing. And last but not least is task fulfillment. This speaks to how completely you've answered the question. A lot of questions on CAEL, you'll see, have 2 parts to them. So it's really important to address all parts of the test instructions to get the full marks. We also want to observe the time. So if it's a 60-second response we need to deliver, we don't have to be exactly at the 60-second mark, but you want to be as close as you can get. So even 54 seconds with a very well-developed answer would be acceptable. So don't aim for perfection, but do use the time given to you to impress the raters, and they'll hopefully give you a great score as a result. There are other sort of individual elements, I guess you can say, that apply to particular tasks. And I'll maybe wait until we get to these responses before I dive in, because it'll be confusing when you haven't yet seen the question. But do be aware that this checklist we've just discussed, this is going to apply to all 5 of your speaking responses. Every time you speak, all 4 of these categories will be assessed. Your score will be determined based on the number of strengths you can present in all 4 areas. So it's a package deal. We can't just do really well in one part, like vocabulary, and then expect to get a really high score. We have to deliver strengths across the whole checklist. But again, in certain parts of the test, there are a couple of additional elements to keep in mind. And as I say, I'll address those when we get there. I think it will be easier for us to remember them then. So without further ado, let's jump into our independent speaking, where we've got those 3 questions to tackle. We're only speaking, so it's a bit easier at this point. So here's that same question we briefly addressed earlier. What do you want to study at university and why? This question is just called type A because it's the first question of the whole test. That's all that means. And again, you already, I hope, would have noticed you've got 30 seconds to think about your ideas. So pick your subject, think of maybe 3 reasons why that subject is the one you'd like to study. And then when it comes time, you're delivering that 60-second response. So I'm going to show you what our test taker, I'll play for you her answer. So this woman, you'll hear, she had this exact question on her CAEL test when she took it in the past. This is how she used her preparation time. She took some notes, and I'd like to share them with you to give you ideas about what you might do. So first of all, during the prep time, of course, we have to read the question. I know that sounds obvious, but I remind you, read the question and very, very quickly identify what it is you'll be addressing. So again, 2 parts, which is normal on CAEL. The what you want to study, that's easy. You pick a subject, and we don't want to take 30 seconds just to pick the subject. Within about 4 seconds flat, you should have a subject in mind. And then use the rest of your time to start thinking about why that subject is appealing. If you choose to take notes, and I think they're helpful myself, you can do so. So here are the notes that one female CAEL test taker took down before she started to speak. So I'll just maybe read out the ideas presented in her notes. She's using short form, which of course we'd have to do because 30 seconds is really quick. So you won't have time to write out full sentences, etc. But just looking at the notes that she's made, I can see that she wants to take psychology, and that would be a major. Her second line down, though, speaks about a minor, and I think it's classics, something to do with Eastern classics. I'm not really sure what the rel st means, but classics to me looks like her idea. Just because I'm familiar with the CAEL test, I've studied it a lot and worked in session like this with lots of test takers over the years. I honestly don't think that this test taker is going to have time to speak about both a major and a minor. She's only got 60 seconds. So this is going to be part of your study habits at home, understanding how many ideas is appropriate for a 60-second question in this case. We'll see how she answers it, but I'm guessing if she just talked about psychology, that would probably be enough. And it looks to me the rest of her notes actually give answers just about psychology anyway. So that first reason would be something to do with how the behavior and the mind interact. The second reason psychology is appealing to her looks like it has to do with motivation and personality, I'm guessing. And that last point down is all about language acquisition, I would guess. So how psychology and language skills are developed. Really interesting ideas. So in the prep time, you'll have time, I hope, to think of those main points. When you speak on the spot, you're going to come up with the examples to develop them. You likely won't have time to think a lot about examples at this stage. So again, here's a question. Let's listen to how well she answers this question. And after we've heard it, we're going to, as a group, hopefully using the Zoom chat, we can identify some of the strengths and weaknesses that she's demonstrated using the same checklist we've just discussed. So I've included the transcript for us to follow. On the real test, the raters giving you a score will just have the recordings of your voice. They do not have a transcript, but they can still tell. They're professional and practiced. They can still assess you based on just the speech parts alone. But we'll use this transcript, and you'll receive these transcripts in your study packs too. So I'll play it for you now. We'll have a quick discussion about strengths and weaknesses, and then I will let you know what score this woman received on her CAEL test for speaking. So here we go.
I'm a 5th-year student in UBC majoring in psychology and minoring in classical, Near Eastern, and religious studies. And so I guess in that way, I've already decided what I want to study in university. The reason that I wanted to major in psychology is because I've always been interested in the way that human behavior is shaped by the human mind. Everyone has different motivations and different personalities, and that affects how our actions come. So I was very interested in learning about that, particularly also in language acquisition, the psychology behind language, and how there's a certain point in our lives where we are able to pick up language more easily, and also just how the environment and our genes and all sorts of different factors affect our lives in ways that we don't even realize. And I also minored in classical studies.
Okay. Aha. Did you see how she got cut off at the end and did not have time to talk about her minor in classics? I knew that was going to happen. So, again, it's just a reminder to all of you that once you practice this enough, you're going to have a pretty good understanding of what you will have time to discuss and what you won't. So, let's get to this now. If we look just at her speaking skills, I would argue that, first of all, the pronunciation was very clear. We could understand all the words, even if there wasn't a transcript in front of us. So this is ideal. This is definitely what we want to produce in our speech. Her rhythm and her intonation and all basic elements of speech, her volume, her speed almost were accurate too. There were some pauses, and you'll notice in this transcript, we've included those. They're called ellipses, which is the dot, dot, dot. That just indicates she took a little pause, trying to think again of the next idea. But I would argue that those pauses were not overly long or intrusive. So her speech was moved ahead in a fairly fluent fashion with the appropriate rhythm. So all those delivery skills were handled quite well. Her language use, though, if you look just at the sentence structure and the way she connects ideas together, the grammar is correct and the meaning is clear. So that's definitely step one. That's the most important part to learn first. But once we've mastered the basic sentence structures, we then want to start elevating the complexity. As you can see, this test taker has only given us very basic conjunctions. She's used mostly and so, or and also. So try your best as you're studying, as I say, to learn different ways of connecting. The second example in red that you see, where she says, oh, the reason I wanted to major in psychology, it's a fairly simple idea, but at least it gives variety. So that's another element you're focusing on. You want to showcase to the raters how much language development you can produce. So with a good variety of language words and transitions, you're going to help your score too. This female speaker definitely demonstrates a better performance in her actual vocabulary usage than she did with the sentence structure. So all of these words in blue are, first of all, connected to her topic. So that's important. They're all accurate with their meaning, just talking about what she wants to study in school. So it makes sense to use words like majoring and minoring. And she's speaking specifically about psychology. So throughout this response, you can see words are connected to the topic. Behavior is shaped by different motivations, language acquisition, etc. So for the most part, her words are very formal and appropriate in tone. There are a handful, maybe two examples that are a little bit less formal she might have improved upon. And you'll notice right in the middle almost of this response in black, bold, italicized print, she's got one expression. She says, how our actions come. And that one's quite a bit weaker than the other example she's demonstrated, but it's only really one weakness. So I wouldn't dwell on it too much. You're not looking for perfection. You're looking to demonstrate as many strengths as you can. And provided you have so many strengths compared to just one or two little weaknesses, it's not something to worry too much about. The only other structure here, we italicize this, although we left it in blue, pickup language is a little bit casual. So we maybe could think of something better there. But again, overall vocabulary use is actually quite strong for her. Now, her ideas, her content details definitely answer the question. Again, that's the first step. That's the most important piece here. I love the way she's opened. You can see yourself. She's added some of those details in that we always like to see. So she's mentioned that she's a fifth-year student at UBC, majoring in psychology, and then she identifies her minor. So great way to start. She does have those three main reasons. You can see them in that sort of orangey brown print. The first reason talks about behavior and the human mind, and she's got a couple of details there she talks about. And then she moves on to language acquisition. There's definitely room for improvement here. She's just talking about motivations, personalities, and actions. We might have said a little bit more about that. As far as language acquisition goes, it's an interesting question to ask. She says she wonders if there's a certain point in our lives where we can learn a language more easily. I like that opening, but it would have been better for her to actually address what parts of age she's discussing. I might have added a thought to say, for instance, do children actually absorb language more easily than adolescents or older adults do? So by actually identifying those points in the life she's introduced here, that would have added a better, precise content detail. So always push yourself. Once you open the door and give your main idea, try to add in these details that support. Her final content idea is wonderful. She's talking about the environment and genes. So this is one of those nature versus nurture debates, but she doesn't have time to develop it because she rushes to talk about her minor. So this is not the right approach here. I would take out this whole idea about her minor in classical studies, and I would give details about nature and nurture. So just to say something about, we can question, the lifestyle that we're born into. Does that have a greater effect on our ability to learn a language? Or is it our DNA makeup? Are we born with the capability of understanding? So that would be a much stronger way to go. But at least she has, from a task fulfillment standpoint, she's answered the question, right? She's identified her major. She's given 3 main reasons with some supporting details. She's spoken for the full 60 seconds as well. Her opening is wonderful, but she did not have time for a closing. So would you like to guess her score now? Remember that score chart that I showed you earlier? Band 90 is the top score. Band 70 is about the average score that most schools would be looking for, or employers. Any ideas what you think maybe she earned overall on her speaking? I'll just do a quick poll here out of curiosity. And it's hard. Again, none of us are raters, myself included. But once we start identifying strengths and weaknesses, it becomes a little easier to understand if we're looking at more of a beginner, intermediate, or advanced level speaker in this case. So it looks like, as I look at the Zoom chat, it looks like all of you have assessed between 60 to 80. And yeah, you're right in the right ballpark for sure, for sure. I will let you know that this woman earned a band 70 overall. So because I'm not a rater, I myself don't even have access to the data that tells me what she got on this precise response. So I don't know if on this response she got a 70, an 80, or what have you. But the way that the scoring works is that once you deliver your 5 speaking responses, you will get an individual score on all 5 of those. And then those scores are averaged together. They're always rounded to the nearest 10 to make it easy for the score report as well. So what I can verify you for sure is that her answers, her 5 speaking answers, when they were averaged together, equaled a band 70. So that gives you an indication that she's got some fairly high level skill. And this response is actually a really good start. I think that she's looking good in her academic capabilities. So it gives us something to aim for anyway. So to wrap up what we were talking about with our first question here, because you've only got 30 seconds to read the question and think of your main points, you want to very quickly decide what you'll talk about. And in this case, it was a matter of picking a subject really quickly that we could devise some accurate reasons to study for this question anyway. For a 60-second question, if you've got lots of supporting details and a well-developed opening, you could get away with just having 2 reasons, but you'd have to have plenty of detail to support them. If you've got less supporting details or fewer details, you probably would want 3 reasons then why that topic was appealing to you, and develop it that way. But whatever you do, every time you suggest that main idea, you definitely want examples to support them. Okay, your opening is a good way to effectively use time on the clock, especially for those 2-minute questions. If you can deliver a good 10-second opening that's on topic, it's going to help you out with the time too. But you're always looking to focus the listener's attention immediately on the topic at hand. And remember how this speaker opened? She says, I'm a 5th-year student at UBC and I'm planning to major in psychology. Wonderful, very clear, very to the point, lots of detail packed in. So that was a great opening. It is okay when you're speaking about yourself to use the pronoun I. You can personalize this response because you're the one that is studying or doing these actions. I know this is a formal test, but we can, in personal moments, use those pronouns I. So do be aware of that for CAEL. Anyway, that's the first question done. Let's move on to the second question, which is simply called type B to represent the second question in. Again, up here, we notice this time we've got 60 seconds to think, which is wonderful, but we're also being asked to speak for 90 seconds. So of course, we'll want at least an extra main idea with some supporting details. So the question here is still about you and your education, but it's got a different focus. So this one says, in your opinion, what are some of the strengths of high school education in your home country? So I'll place that question down here at the bottom of the screen. And again, let's just focus on the prep time. We would obviously use our prep time to read that question through and understand the 2 parts of it, I guess. Probably we'd want to make some quick notes. And when we're taking notes, it's ideal to put them in the order that we're going to speak to them. So I'm going to present just a basic template outline here. If this was your answer, can we fill in some of these details together? Let's do a quick brainstorm. Because after we're done this, I'm going to ask you to do some practice speaking at home. Your microphones are muted, so we won't hear you. And that's the good news. Don't be shy. But I do want you to answer this question using your ideas applicable to your own life and your own home country. So perhaps we can offer a couple of suggestions now to get you thinking ahead about that. So your opening statement, I think for this one, it would make the most sense to identify perhaps the city and the country where you went to high school. If it were me, I would even name the high school and give the dates I attended. I think that would be easy to do if you base it on your own life. So for me, this is what my response would sound like. I'll give an example and you can think about your own life experience. I might just say, I attended Chippewa Secondary School throughout the early 90s in North Bay, Ontario. And I had the benefit of experiencing many opportunities there that led to success throughout my career. So something like that, what I just said, again, the details about where I studied, when, etc., those are easy. But you notice I tried to add on to the end to connect to the scope of this question. I have to talk about strengths or benefits. So throughout my 90-second answer, I have to give examples of some of the experiences that I had in high school that were indeed strengths. So what were those strengths? How did they help me? How did they benefit me? How were they advantageous? That's what you're thinking of. Even if your high school experiences were really awful, and that would be sad if that were true, but not all of us liked high school. Even if that's the case, you're going to have to fudge a little bit. Casual expression, meaning you have to answer this question and you have to focus on the strengths. So if you can't think of one in real life, you're going to have to make one up. I'll maybe demonstrate one. I'll give you one example of a strength that's real for me. And then I'd like you to suggest one of your own strengths in the Zoom chat if you're willing to. So the very first strength that comes to my mind, true for me, would be the fact that there were so many extracurricular activities and clubs offered throughout the entire school district, let alone at my own high school. So that's strength number one, is the variety of extracurricular clubs. Now, I'm not done with that yet. I have to support it. So I'm going to identify the clubs I belong to as examples first. So I might say, for instance, I was heavily involved in the dramatic arts programs all the way through high school from grades 9 to 13. So dramatic arts, I've mentioned. I'm not done yet. I have to explain how that was a strength. So I might just say then, throughout my 5 years of study performing on stage with my theater troupe, I learned improvisational skills and how to problem solve quickly when people forgot lines or when there were lighting errors. All right, so I'm identifying skills there that I've learned, and I might just tack that on now to my current career if I can. I might just say learning spontaneity has supported me so many times throughout my teaching career, because sometimes tech platforms will fail or things don't go according to plan and we have to troubleshoot in order to deliver a lesson. Something like that would work. Okay, that's strength number one. So I've talked about that at quite some length. I've got 90 seconds to fill. So if I'm able to identify the strength, extracurricular clubs, identify a specific club I belong to, dramatic arts, identify the skills I learned there, which I did, improvisation and problem solving, and then really emphasize how those skills benefited me, which I did there by connecting it to my career as a teacher, learning spontaneity. All right, all of that takes a good, 20 seconds or so to talk about. So we're looking very, very good for time, filling 90 seconds without rushing, but by giving lots of detail that makes sense. So once I'm done with that strength, I might just say another benefit to my high school education in Canada is whatever I think of. Okay, so I might have time just to talk about two strengths if I've got lots of detail, or I might need to think of a third one on the spot. So that's what you're doing. So can I open it up to you? Can you identify any strengths at all or any skill sets that you learned at your own high school? Or think of the system in the country that you went to. Again, I don't think we're all from Canada. I was born and raised here, so that's why I use that as my example. Wherever you were born and attended high school, I should say, in the world, that's what you're focusing on. Do you have any of your own ideas you wanted to share before you started speaking? This is to your advantage because then you might give each other ideas about what to talk about. You need more than one main idea. So I've given you one suggestion, and now it's up to you to come up with the other two. Going once, going twice, last chance for my help. Aha, okay, good. So we've got at least an introduction coming from a table. Good. So you attended school in Cameroon. Nice. I would suggest that you mention the name of your school. Can even mention when you went. Yeah. So that's the intro part, and that should be the easy part. But the main content here, what are some of the benefits or some of the strengths of your own high school education? So extracurricular clubs and opportunities. What else? What else could you think of? I'll give you about 10 seconds and then I have to move on with or without your participation here. Okay. Yep. Natebo, good. I'm glad you've got an intro, but I'm more interested right now in the content. The content is the main part. So you all need to have ideas. Okay. Yeah. So we've got lots of introductions coming in. That's great. So what did you learn in St. Francis College in Tabo, or what opportunities did you have at military school, Rain? Can we extend that? Just there we go. Finally, yes, thank you. Discipline. So discipline is your example of a strength. So I would expect in your response, Rain, you would talk about the type of discipline that was instilled upon all the students in your class. And again, I've not attended military school, so I can't speak to that. You can. So you're going to describe the type of discipline that was meted out. I'd also expect to understand from you how that discipline has shaped you, how it's improved your capabilities, and perhaps even how it carries over to your current self in whatever career you're pursuing, etc. That's definitely the best way to go. Yeah, and for sure, Natebo is now listing extracurricular programs that they attended in Cameroon. Wonderful. Yeah, you're very welcome to use my suggestion. That's why we're doing this, to help each other out. So we've got two so far, extracurricular opportunities, and we've got values, I'll call them, like discipline, right? And again, I'm going to leave it up to the rest of you now. So I'm going to set a timer. You'll still have 1 minute to think on your own. You could write these down at home if you so choose. But when the minute of prep time is finished, I'm going to announce that out loud and set my timer for 90 seconds. You're very welcome to record your speaking into your cell phones, and then you can listen to it later on and do your own assessment. I think that's helpful as well. Let's see how you do. So same question. You're all thinking about strengths of your high school education. At the bottom of the screen are the two timers. So the one on the left is the 1 minute prep time. I'm going to set it now, and you've got 1 minute to think of your other examples of strengths. So here we go. Okay, prep time's finished. So now I'm setting the right-hand timer for the 90 seconds. Keep an eye on that timer as you're talking out loud, because you want to wrap up your answer by the time it's just about done. So here's 90 seconds. Just do your best. We can't hear you, so please don't be shy. Try your best. Here we go. Okay, so that is it. That is 90 seconds done. So I hope you've recorded your own response there so that you can use this checklist you'll get in your little study pack later on. I think part of improving our own skill set is, first of all, being very well aware of our own strengths and weaknesses. So there's definitely a self-assessment piece that goes into any language learning, in my opinion. So again, go through these elements and ask yourself, are you demonstrating these skills well? If not, do something about it. This is your chance to study those weak areas extra hard. If you are working in a study group, or some of you might have a tutor, or even taking some sort of a language class, this is also something that I would expect to be learning a little bit more about in school. But you can always work with a tutor too, if you've got one, to go through these elements with you. Anyway, let's listen to our test taker, our same female test taker. She earned that band 70. She's going to answer this question based on her own experiences. So you can compare your response now to what is being delivered here. And again, you will receive this response in your study pack to review later. So take a listen and we'll see how she does.
I grew up in the Philippines and went to a very strict Chinese school before moving here to Canada. So there are definitely some stark differences between the two educational systems that I noticed. One of the advantages of going to school in the Philippines is the discipline that was instilled in me since I was a little child. For example, we had homework practically every day, and if the homework wasn't finished or handed in, we were simply given a 0. No extensions, no makeups, no extra credit, just a 0. And that really shaped my study habits and still stay with me today. To this day, I don't procrastinate. I make sure to hand in my work on time. I make sure to also plan in advance and manage my time wisely so that I'm able to do all the work that I have to do at a reasonable amount of time without getting too stressed. Another advantage is the high standards of achievement that were set by schools in the Philippines. Most of the stuff that I learned when I moved here and went to high school in Canada, I already learned when I was in elementary school. So there was definitely a higher standard of achievement.
And that would be that. Okay, we already know her score. So it's a band 70, meaning she's got some very strong foundational skills. Her speaking skills are very similar to what we heard from her in the first question. Nothing more to add. She still uses intonation and rhythm effectively. Her pronunciation is clear. She still has a few pauses here and there just to think of the next idea, but overall, she keeps the speech moving forward. And that's what we like to see. She's done a slightly better job, I would say, of making more complex connections with her sentence structures. So you are seeing a couple of varied transitions, like one of the advantages, or for example, and later another advantage is. But apart from that, we are still relying on fairly basic conjunctions like so, and also. So I would suggest to this speaker that she's doing a great job to start out. I would maybe push herself further to develop the sentence structures. That would be an area of weakness for her. Her vocabulary word choice, though, just like we saw earlier, is still quite strong. So these are the blue words you see on screen, like stark differences and instilled in me, procrastinate, etc. So she's demonstrating that formal register we like to see in an academic setting, and the words make sense for the topic. That's really important. Towards the bottom, you'll notice again 2 expressions we've identified in black bolded print, italicized. The first one there is most of the stuff that I learned. That is not academic. So please do not use words like stuff. Even in your day-to-day speech, it doesn't tell you much. She could easily have said most of the skills that I learned. That would have been 100% better. And at the very bottom, higher standard of achievement sounds great, but she just used that expression about 2 sentences earlier. So try your best as well not to repeat the same words, as the raters do appreciate a better variety. So bear that in mind. As far as her content goes, she started out well, but she didn't use her time wisely at the end. So let's discuss that now. Her opening, I think, is wonderful. We know right away she grew up in the Philippines. She went to this strict Chinese school, and then she moved to Canada. So very interesting background story there. She frames this response to contrast, basically, her experiences at this Chinese school as compared to Canada. So she focuses the advantages of going to school in the Philippines. That's how she's, again, framing this narrative. So you can see yourself, the very first reason we've bolded it or ghosted it out for now. But that whole middle chunk of her answer is giving tons of examples and detail to support the main point. So she's talking to you about discipline. Look at all the wonderful examples. She says, in school, if homework wasn't finished, we got a 0. Nobody got an extension, no extra chance to make it up, just a 0. So that's sort of one detail there. She also then connects that to her current state. These study habits have shaped her into who she is today. She says, I don't procrastinate. I always meet deadlines. I always plan in advance. So all of this is giving very realistic examples of the discipline she learned as a small child, or a younger person anyway. So this is fantastic. The transition here works. So we know we're getting the next main point, another advantage. She mentions the high standards of achievement, but she never tells us what those high standards are. I don't frankly know what that means, as she's not explained it. So does that mean that teachers expected everybody to receive an A, and if you didn't get the A, you had to stay late after school? I don't know what that means, right? I'm expecting her to explain it to us. And the sad news is that this speaker actually spoke for about 1 minute and 15 seconds, whereas she had 1.5 minutes on the clock. So she had an additional 15 seconds there that she could easily have added in at least a couple of sentences to identify what these high standards were. That certainly would have elevated the content score a lot. But overall, at least she's got 2 main reasons. Fantastic support for the first one, but not well developed for the second. Bear that in mind. So that does have a slightly negative effect on her task fulfillment, because she didn't use all the time awarded to her and didn't also develop her final point. So again, band 70, I'm starting to see perhaps why she's earned that score overall. I think she's got the capability of earning higher, but she has to definitely tweak a few weaker areas. Anyway, whatever question comes your way for this second question, you'll want to think of probably 3 ideas to support your opinion, as you do have 90 seconds. If you can get away with tons of detail like this speaker demonstrated in her first point, 2 ideas might be enough, but use your time wisely. I like to start with an opening, as she did. You know, she says, oh, I went to school in the Philippines. I attended this strict Chinese school. That's a really nice sort of, I wouldn't even call that a general statement. It's just anchoring the scene. Some people would prefer to start just with an opinion, might just say, my experience in the Philippines at high school was actually much stronger than what I experienced in Canada. So that might have been effective too. But she did introduce her points, right? One main advantage is, and then another advantage is. So that was clear. And she was very unbiased, which is ideal. She wasn't saying my school was the best school. We can't make statements like that. All she said is that my experiences in the Philippines were quite sound, and she gave us reasons why. She had lots of 2 benefits to talk about. So personalize it, give yourself examples, etc. Try to wrap it up as well. She didn't. She stopped talking, but I know all of you will use your time wisely and offer a final statement of conclusion to remind us that you certainly learned a lot of skills at school that will continue to help you in your chosen career. That might have been a good way to end it for sure. Anyway, let's move on to our third question here, all about this is your visual, this is your graph, and then we're done part 1. So what happens here is you've got 60 seconds to look at the graph. You will be speaking for 2 full minutes. So we're adding time as we go, if you've recognized that. You have 3 steps to do to answer this question completely. You can see the graph on the left-hand side of your screen. It is a line graph. The instructions will always be on the bottom for this question. So the first thing you're going to do is describe what you're looking at. Then you're going to explain the information presented, and then you'll offer up some conclusions. So I'm going to briefly take you through these steps. And then again, I'd like you to practice answering this question yourself. So let's see if we can gather some ideas as a group first. Clearly, this little sentence summary at the top explains to you exactly what you're looking at. And you're going to use that idea as you open up your response. Try not to read right from the chart, though. Try to use your own words. So if this were my answer, I might say something like, I'm looking at a line graph that depicts the number of travelers who entered Canada who are not permanent residents of the country. So you can see I've expressed this same idea, but I've used my own vocabulary to explain it. And that is the ultimate skill that you want to work on. Try to showcase to the raters you've got your own wording. All right, once I've done that, once I've opened that up, I want to continue describing what I'm looking at. And literally, you're just kind of going step by step. We now know the topic. What I would do is say the number of people entered into this study ranked from 0 up to 5 million. And the study of non-resident travelers was taken over a 3-year period from 2013 to 2016. And only 3 methods of transportation were observed, namely the number of people who drove into Canada from the mainland, the number of people who flew to Canada, or the number of people who crossed the ocean by boat. Okay, so again, just to recap, open up, try to use your own words, explain what you're looking at, describe the axes. So whatever this is, I noticed it was the number of people. I noticed that was the time, and then this is your legend. If you always follow those steps for any graph that comes your way and get into the habit of including those details, that's going to take you a good 20 seconds from the clock, and you've now set yourself up for success. So that's just describing. Literally, I'm explaining to you what I'm seeing on screen. Once you've done that, you go on to the second step, which is all about explaining. And here, what I would do is give an overview of the picture first. I'm hoping that you're noticing, regardless of the method of transportation, over the 3-year study, more and more people are traveling into Canada who are not permanent residents here. So that's the trend, right? We started smaller than we ended in 2016. So I tried to use my academic register to explain that. Another trend I notice, and I hope you do as well, is that in the first year of the study, however, there was a very slight decrease in the number of travelers altogether across all methods of transportation. All right, so again, you're working your way around. You might give examples. This is a great way to fill the time as well. You might just say, for instance, the number of people who flew to Canada in 2013 was approximately 3.8 million, whereas by the end of the following year, that number had dipped to about 3.5 million. Okay, so again, you don't have to explain every single number, but you get to decide, pick and choose the details that make sense to you to fill that time effectively and to give an accurate picture. So once you've made your explanations, you will move on to your conclusions. And you know what? We just mentioned that there was a slight decrease within that first year of travel. So this might be a really good opportunity for you to recognize or come up with a logical reason why. You know, perhaps there were terrorist threats around the world during that year that influenced people's decisions about whether it was safe to travel or not. So that's one logical reason could have happened, right? You might say perhaps the economy was weaker between 2013 to 2014, and people simply didn't have the funds necessary to travel. So again, you're not fact checking this. The raters won't fact check it. Your job here is to offer up reasons or suggestions to explain the data as you see here. And as long as the reasons make sense and could be possible, that's what an effective conclusion or inference is. So you must do all 3 of these things within the 2 minutes to earn a complete score. So with that in mind, I hope I've given you some great examples to draw from. Again, I'll place the same question on screen. You've got all the info there. I hope you can read it. I know the numbers are a bit small, but I will set the 1-minute timer on the left, and this is going to be your prep time. So you still have time to get your ducks in a row, as we say. And then when the prep time's done, I'd like you to speak for the 2 minutes and try your best to develop the score. Record your voices as well. You can always review it later on. So the 1-minute prep time starts right now. Prep time is finished, so now it's time to speak. So please hit record on your recording device, and you've got 2 minutes now to deliver the answer. All right, that would be it. That would be it. I'm really hoping that you had enough to talk about to fill those 2 minutes. Really, the only way to fill the time effectively is to make sure you're giving enough detail for all three of those steps. Don't rush it through, take your time to develop. In your study pack, you're also going to receive a little summary of basically some of the main steps, anyways, that we reviewed just earlier. So if it were me, I'd suggest perhaps that you deliver this answer a few times in a row out loud as you continue to study at home. You can use this as a guide if you didn't think of these ideas on your own. But the more you can produce a response repeatedly, you're going to fine tune the and have more confidence to build it, I think. So that would be a study technique. Do note that the same 4 elements of the checklist will apply for your own skill or score rather. But at the very bottom, there's one extra little part to keep in mind. Part of your score for just this one question is going to come from how accurately you are describing the graph, how accurately, again, you're identifying the trends. So what's increasing? What's decreasing? What is remaining consistent? Elements like that. And then the conclusions that you draw. You should definitely have more than one conclusion. I demonstrated about the dip in that first year. And again, they have to be realistic. So all of those elements are going to help your score for this particular response. So to that end, then, why don't we finish off with our first female CAEL test taker? She was the one that earned band 70. I'm going to play her answer now while we look at the chart so you can analyze the accuracy. And then we'll have a quick talk about what she's done well, where she needs to improve. And then I'm going to showcase and play for you another response by a different test taker so you can see the difference in ability. Here we go with the band 70.
Based on the graph, there are more and more travelers coming into Canada within the last 3 years. And most of them seem to be taking the plane to come here. Interestingly, there's also a drop in travelers in the middle of 2014, but it seems to have picked up after that. It'd be interesting to know why there was a drop. In land transportation, it's pretty relatively stable. There is about close to 1 million, and it's also been increasing recently. Air travel is by far the most popular one, and sea has just remained at practically zero, less than 500,000.
All right, that's it. So remember, this was meant to be a 2-minute response. You can see for yourself how short the transcript is, but this woman, she only spoke for 48 seconds. So I don't know the individual score she received on this response, but it definitely would have been much lower than the other two we've heard earlier. So remember your 5 scores you get on speaking, they are averaged together to give you the overall speaking score. So perhaps this is why she's got a band 70. If she had continued with the same capabilities we saw from the first 2 answers, if she was able to answer all 5 questions that way, perhaps her score might have been higher, but this one definitely would have negatively affected the average, I would suggest. That being said, I mean, for such a short answer, she still maintains her strong delivery. Her intonation's a little bit off, though. She almost sounds tired or even bored. So I don't know what happened in this question. Either she was out of energy or didn't understand it. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely has a different presentation style than the other two we heard. The blue words are still demonstrating some vocabulary words that are appropriate. You know, drop and stable, increasing. Sure, those words make sense when you're describing lines on a graph, but she also has some casual language, about close to most popular one. So these are a little bit vague. Definitely not as strong as other examples we've seen from her. She doesn't give us any conclusions either. So task fulfillment's incredibly weak, doesn't use the time well, and doesn't finish the question. All she says is it would be interesting to know why there was a dip or a drop in visitors in that first year, but she never comes up with the suggestion why. So again, just note to all of you, you've got to give conclusions and suggestions that make sense. Don't forget to do that. Otherwise, your task fulfillment might be weak as well. Anyway, with that being said, let's retire that one test taker. She did have 2 other answers to deliver, but we won't listen to them today for time. I'd like to demonstrate now a second test taker. And this woman actually earned a higher score overall on her CAEL speaking. So let's listen to this woman give her answer to the same question and talk about the extra detail she's added in.
The chart before us depicts the number of non-resident travelers to Canada between the years of 2013 to 2016 traveling by land, sea, and air. The number of non-residence travelers to Canada is measured and starts from 0, goes to 500,000, and increases in increments of 500,000 up to 5 million. We can see that air travel is the most popular method, then land, then sea. However, between the years of 2013 and 2014, the number of non-resident travelers to Canada who came by air and land were on the decline. What we can conclude from this is that between those years, travel to Canada was a little less popular and so did not draw as many tourists or other non-resident travelers. After that, however, travel by land and air increases from the years 2014 to 2016. This, we can conclude, means that travel to Canada by any means was on the increase, more popular and more desired, with even a greater increase between 2014 and 2015 than there is between 2015 and 2016 by air. Sea travel is generally, on the whole, very steady and not increasing by much any year on this graph. And so what we can conclude is that people prefer to go by land or by air if they are traveling to Canada.
All right. Look at how much longer the transcript is even on the screen. It looks to be about double the length of what we heard from the Band 70 test taker earlier. All right, so what this female does, and I will identify what we've already probably noticed, it sounds to me like English is her first language. So she definitely has the benefit of having already that natural rhythm, pronunciation, and intonation that people who are speaking English as an additional language would have to work on. So we can grant her that benefit or that advantage. But apart from that, even her volume and her speed, her structures are fairly fluent. She does demonstrate more startups and slowdowns. Her pauses are actually a little bit longer than what we heard from the Band 70 test taker earlier. So I point that out to you to suggest that even though English is her first language, she still has some elements of speech to work on. So we don't want to pause for quite as long, as it does interrupt the flow a little tiny bit. But overall, it's definitely acceptable. She speaks for 1 minute and 53 seconds, by the way, to contrast to the other women. So a full answer certainly is given. Her ability to connect ideas together is also done at a higher level, justifying the higher score. So we see connections like however, and what we can conclude from this, and so on. Those are definitely an improvement over and also that we heard earlier. But what you'll notice as you look at these transitions is that we also have repeated the same exact transitions throughout. She uses only the joining words, however, and conclude. So again, it's just a reminder to all of us to try to vary, to try to demonstrate as many different conjunctions that make sense, just to make sure we've got a well-rounded response. Her vocabulary is accurate for this particular response too. It's got an academic tone when we say about increasing in increments and on the decline and very steady. But you'll notice this speaker also repeated that word increases several times. So my best advice to all of you is to work through, you can use a thesaurus at home. A thesaurus is sort of like a dictionary, but what it does is it gives you all sorts of synonyms, words that mean the same as. And you'll have to know that you're doing a graph. You're going to be analyzing a graph when you take CAEL. So if you can learn a bunch of different words that mean to increase or to decrease or to stay the same, if you've got those words committed to your memory, you can just pick and choose them as you give this response because they're going to come in handy at some point. So that might have improved the vocab just a little bit here, rather than say increases about 4 or 5 times, for sure. Her organization and content, though, is definitely a strong point of this response. So in the opening, she summarizes the main points of the chart exactly as I demonstrated earlier. So she's got the title summarized. She's got the time frame, 2013 to 2016. She has the legend, so the 3 methods of transportation, and she's also got the number of people, up to 5 million. So all of those details make an effective opening, and they also effectively use the time on your speech. The middle section here with her details, at a quick glance, you can see she is giving examples from the chart as well. She's always on topic. She is summarizing some of the general trends rather as well. She speaks for almost the full 2 minutes. She does offer a few conclusions, but to score even better, she likely could have had more conclusions. She doesn't get into too much detail, but at least it's passable. She has checked off all the boxes, so to speak, and given a full answer. So this is, by the way, a band 80 test taker. The woman we heard first was band 70. The average of this second woman's responses, all 5 of them, averaged out to give her about a band 80. And I think, honestly, if you just even look at her capabilities in this first response and think back to what we heard from the first woman today, I would suggest that, yes, this second woman is definitely demonstrating a higher skill set across all aspects of that checklist that we've been talking about. So when you're speaking on that graph, again, just to wrap up here, you're going to have a little bit. This is your opportunity to look at the legend, look at the information or the axes contained within the graph and know exactly what you're talking about when what you're looking at. So if you can summarize what this graph is about first and then start getting into the trends and details, I would suggest you start with the big picture. Is the information basically trending upwards or downwards? What's sort of common across the whole graph? And then you can get into some contrasting elements too. That would be great. Draw your conclusions in when it makes sense to do so as well. Again, here are some examples of specialized vocabulary words. You would learn these at home first, commit them to memory, and then use the appropriate words on the test. So words like stabilize, fluctuate, marginal, you can see how high level they sound. Much better than saying things like, it stays the same. That would not be academic. And again, you can predict. I think a very effective closing for the graph is to make a prediction about how the data would continue if the study had also continued. Sometimes that's an effective closing there. Anyway, whatever you're doing across all of CAEL, the must-dos, we'll call them, for your independent speaking, you have to, of course, read your question quickly and understand exactly what you're talking about, because there's not a lot of time to prepare. Whatever your own opinion is and your ideas, you should be backing them up with stories or facts that make sense. Definitely base your answers on your own life experience and knowledge. That's the easiest way to go about answering those questions in part 1. They're pretty much about you and your education anyway. And try to just speak from beginning to end, using your time wisely, but organizing your thoughts. Don't ramble on in different directions. Try your best to organize it so it makes sense and we don't get lost as we're listening, so to speak. All right, let's finish off here today. We've got about a half hour more. So we're going to finish off by looking at the more formal presentations required of you in the integrated speaking sections. So this dives into the reading and listening passages a little bit. So we're finished with part 1. We've taken that off the chart, so to speak, looking at integrated speaking. So starting with part 2, you're going to complete a little short reading passage first and answer some questions. Then you'll be given a longer reading passage to complete. You'll be answering about 11 questions there. Right after you finish that long reading passage, you'll be presented with a speaking question. You must use information you've just learned about throughout that reading passage to answer that speaking question. And part of your score is going to be derived based on how accurately you're using the details you've learned about in that reading passage itself, in the source. For part 3, it's the exact same setup, but instead of reading, it's going to be listening. So a short listening lecture, answer a few questions. Long listening lecture, answer even more questions, about 11. And then the speaking question will be based on what you've learned in that longer lecture. For both of these, whether you're reading or listening, you're going to be given 1 minute to read the speaking question through and look back at the actual passages on the computer screen. So draw details from there. And then when it comes time to speak, be ready to speak for 2 full minutes. So these 2 answers, the 2 final ones, are the longest answers to deliver so far. So again, the same 4 elements that we have been talking about are still here. That never changes. But at the very bottom for the reading question, part of your score just for this question comes from how accurately you're using what you've learned from the reading passage to help fill in the details for the answer. And part of your score also comes from how well you're able to explain these ideas in your own words. So paraphrasing skills is going to help you out on this test. So I'm showing you what your reading question is all about. You can see in the top left corner of the computer screen, it tells you you're working through part 2, speaking on the long reading. Timer is always here. We have 60 seconds to read the question and think about the answer, and then 2 minutes to talk. So here's where the setup is just a little bit different. You'll notice for the part 2, we have an instructional page, which we're on right now. That's why the word instructions is bolded in, if you will, in white. And the instructions page tell you what you should already know before you take CAEL. We just talked about this. We have to use information from the reading passage. We should be using our own words as we speak. And that big long checklist tells us our content, our language use, and our source material usage too is going to help determine the score. You should not have to take your precious 60 seconds of prep time to read those instructions. These are instructions you should know by heart before you come into CAEL, but they are there on the computer screen just in case you want to review them if you've got time, which I don't think you will, but you never know. The question itself, this is how you use your prep time. You read the question, and this one says, why do engineering disasters happen, and what are the causes of the errors? So again, it's a 2-part question, which is almost always the case in CAEL. So during the prep time, keep in mind, you have to remember, you've already read the reading passage and answered questions. So this topic is already quite fresh in your mind. You just finished answering those reading questions. But during the prep time, I would click on the reading passage tab, and it will show you again the exact same reading article you've just worked through. So using your prep time, scroll through. There are about 8 or 9 paragraphs usually, and you're going to start pulling out details that actually answer this question. You can note them down. That's what I would do, is just take a few quick notes so that you've got those to guide you as you start to speak. So again, let's recap. What do we need to talk about? Well, there are 2 things. We first have to explain why these disasters are occurring and then what's causing them. And if you're taking notes, I think it's probably helpful to take notes in a chart form. All right, so I'm going to very quickly demonstrate how this is done, and you will be receiving this in your study pack. So I won't read it verbatim to you now, but I've got one example here, one paragraph from the reading passage from this particular test. I would encourage you to read it through on your own at home later on in another study session. But just to demonstrate, if we're trying to figure out why disasters are happening, as you're scrolling through this article on your computer screen during the test, you're going to note details from the passage, which we've highlighted yellow right now. And this would answer the question of why disasters are happening. We're reading that there's often a violation of codes of practice. So when you speak about this, you're going to want to use your own vocabulary. So by using your own words to take notes, you can see in the chart here, it says not following industry rules. So you might speak those words out loud since they're your own, and then so on. You continue on through, and every time you see a detail, you're going to try to write it down. Now, I will point out that in the example of the notes here on screen, we've written the full words down so you understand what they mean. But when you take your own notes, I think you'll be using short forms, because in 60 seconds, I'm not sure you'll have time to write the full word. So this is done more for your own study purposes as an example, but try to keep your own notes short. And you would continue through going on to the causes of errors, etc. Okay, we won't take the time to do that, but this sets you up for success later on. When it comes time to open up and start recording your voice, thinking of a strong opening can be tricky. So if this were me, in the last few moments of my prep, I probably focused my eyes on the very first paragraph, which is what we're showing you. And as I skim read through this opening, I see we're talking about marvelous feats, meaning accomplishments that engineers have made over the years, but that sometimes there are tragedies. So my eyes just quickly skimmed that through. So that might give you an idea to start talking like this. So you're not writing this down. You won't have time, but this is an example of a high level opening. Somebody might say, like everyone else, engineers aren't perfect, but their mistakes tend to be highly visible and attract lots of attention. Right? So whoever came up with that opening, I think it's effective because it now transitions into the disasters that we're going to talk about. As far as your closing goes, you can't predict it until you're ready to close when you're actually speaking, but please come into this test with some sort of a transition in mind. So at the very last sentence, you might just start it by saying in closing, or to summarize, or the most important point to remember is, or whatever your closing statement transition is, pick one and be ready to use it. Because when we hear you start a sentence with one of these transitions, we know that your response is finished. So your organization will be quite strong. Okay, so recap. Use that 60 seconds wisely to prepare. We have to read the question, figure out the two parts we're talking about, skim through that reading passage as I demonstrated, and write down whatever details you find that answer the question. Try to write your notes, though, using your own vocabulary, and you can start thinking ahead about the opening. So with those strategies in mind, let's listen to our Band 80 test taker answer the same question about engineering disasters. Bear in mind, none of us have read through the reading passage she's talking about, but let's just assume we have all of these examples she references do come from that reading passage. All right, so let's see how well she does here.
Engineering disasters happen sometimes because of unforeseen weather conditions such as natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. But also, according to Miroslav Matusek and George Snyder, two researchers who did a study, found that the main causes of engineering failure include carelessness, negligence, and human unpreparedness. More recently, George Sowers looked at 500 cases of engineering failures and identified that 88% of these cases were due to what he called human shortcomings, with ignorance and not using the appropriate technology being the most common factors. What causes these errors is mostly a lack of communication. For example, in the walkway collapse in the Kansas City hotel, that was a lack of communication between the designer and the engineer. Sometimes these errors are caused by using the incorrect units in the case of the Mars Climate Orbiter. And also what could cause errors such as these is not having correct supervision, as it was the case in the error of the Quebec Bridge. All of these cases are human errors, things that could have been avoided had the right precautions been used. These would apply to George Sowers' 33% ignorance. And also to mostly a lack of communication.
All right. Excellent delivery, but those pauses and some of those interjections, like the ahs and the ums, they do start to interrupt the flow a wee bit. I'm not sure about you, but I was starting to get impatient a little bit, listening for the details to come. And that's not meant as a criticism. I realize it's hard to develop a 2-minute response on the spot, but it's just the one element of her speech that she could certainly work on if she's able to, because everything else is great. But it's just those startups and slowdowns and the interjections. If we could reduce those a little bit, then even better. She does speak for the full minute and a half, by the way, or sorry, minute and 58 seconds. So her task fulfillment's great. So we'll continue then, I guess, using her this checklist to go through. Her connections here, her sentence structures, they're all accurate from a grammatical sense, but there's nothing overly high level or complex. As you can see, we're using very simple language like also and also, for example. So a little bit more work on an academic tone might help the sentence structures. But as far as her vocabulary choices, in blue, you can see that she is developing her academic know-how. So unforeseen weather, and down at the bottom, precautions, etc. Those bolded words throughout the top half of her response are certainly accurate and also academic, but she's lifted them right out of the reading passage. So because she's repeating them word for word, it doesn't demonstrate to the raters her own capabilities with vocab. So try your very best. I've said this numerous times already today, but I'll say it one more time. Try your very best to paraphrase and use her own vocabulary, because again, it's going to give you credit for the words, not the reading passage that already exists. She does use the source material though, which is the main thing. She's taking ideas from that reading passage and explaining them, even though she has a hard time rephrasing them in her own words. Her opening, I think, is fine. She's got a closing there too, which is wonderful. Some of the ideas are a bit vague, but she certainly communicates understanding of her key points. And the main thing from a task fulfillment standpoint is she does speak for almost 2 minutes exactly. she does respond appropriately with adequate detail from the passage. That's really all we can ask for. And she did earn a band 80 overall, so we know she's got high level skill. All right, let's finish off. I know we're getting tired, but we're almost there. We're going to finish off with our last question, our very final speaking question of the whole CAEL test. And this one occurs in part 3, which is the listening section. So at the very top left of your computer screen, you see part 3, speaking on the long listening. You also notice you get 60 seconds to prepare and 2 minutes to speak, just like we did for the reading question. The main difference, though, is if you look at those tabs below, the instructions haven't changed. We still know we're being evaluated on the same elements, but using your prep time, you can imagine you've already heard the lecture. You've answered those 11 questions about the lecture. So at least the topic's fresh in your mind. During the prep time, you cannot listen to the lecture again. That's what makes this listening question a little bit tricky. Instead, by clicking on the lecture notes tab, as we're showing you here, the computer itself is going to present to you a little outline. This topic is about economics or economic models. So you can review the outline there, and provided you've understood the lecture adequately that you've just finished listening to, this outline should be sufficient enough to remind you of the main points and some of the details that were discussed. So you're expected to use these details from the outline as you answer the question. And you can see the question on the right of the screen says, what are economic models and how do they help us understand the economy? So again, using the 60 seconds, you're going to identify the 2 parts of the question. The first part is just defining what economic models are. I think that would be fairly straightforward, basing it on the outline and even what you've just heard. Most of your answer, or a lot of it anyway, would likely explain how these models are helping us to understand the economy. So again, to take notes in an organized fashion, we could probably use the same technique that we did earlier. What we've done for study purposes only, you'll get this in your study pack, is we've included a little paragraph or a transcript of part of this lecture. You can see that on the left of the screen. And then we've shown you how note-taking might evolve based on the ideas expressed in the lecture. On the real test, you're only going to have the outline of notes. You have to bear that in mind. But we wanted to show you how notes match some of the content being described. So you can review this at leisure later on. As I say, you'll get this in your study pack. As far as your opening goes, an opening can be really tricky. So what I would suggest you do is try to accomplish those 3 tasks there at the bottom in bulleted point form. So introduce your topic. This whole question is about economics. So if it were me, if I wanted to get the listener interested, if I wanted to hook them into my response about economic models, I would say something about economics in general, and then get right into the main points. So I would want to alert my listener that I'm going to be defining models or economic models, and also listing benefits or how these models will help us to work through the economy. So you're sort of summarizing that question in your own words. And here's a very high level example. Not everybody will think this quickly on their feet, but this is an advanced type of opening. I'll read it out loud to show you what you might say to open this response. We could say, some people find economics boring, but the fact is that the more we know about economics, the more likely we are to be financially successful. One way to understand this topic is through economic models. I'm going to explain what they are, and then I'll demonstrate how we can use economic models to gain insights into how the economy works. That's fantastic. That's going to take a good 15 to 20 seconds to say. So it sort of helps you out develop your content for time. Up to here, that whole first sentence is your introduction. You're hooking the listener's attention. And then this part here is just describing the 2 parts of the question, but in your own words. So that's a very effective outline if you want to think of it as an opening stance. Okay, so again, using your prep time for your listening, read your question, figure out the 2 parts that you have to talk about. You're only able to look at the lecture notes from the computer screen, but you can certainly refer to them and take your own notes, pull out details that will help you answer the question. But as always, use your own vocabulary when you're taking your notes and when you're speaking. And then we try to think of that strong opening so we can develop the response further. So finally, let's listen to our band 80 test taker, give her answer all about economic models, and we'll do a quick review and then we're almost done for the day. Here we go.
An economic model is a smaller scale representation of a certain part of the economy. They use various and a finite number of variables to show or predict one small part of a real world economy. For example, they show the availability of resources and how that affects the production of certain products. Economic models can be visual or they can be mathematical. They can be very simple or they can be very complex and require higher level math or statistics to understand them. There are some that try to oversimplify the part of the economy that it's scrutinizing, and this is the problem with economic models, is that it doesn't fully represent a real world economy. However, what they do help us to understand is smaller subsets of the economy, and if we can have a baseline knowledge of a larger economy, we can slowly but surely be able to understand it in its variability and its ever-changing nature, so that we can better be able to participate in this economy. And these economic models help us do that by providing us with the entry-level knowledge that we need.
Oh, right. Not bad, hey? Same as before, the rhythm, intonation, all those elements of basic speech are definitely present, but it's still the biggest weakness with those pauses and what we call false starts, where she starts speaking, interjects her pauses and finds her footing and continues on. Once she gets a little bit more control over that, I think she'll be unstoppable in her presentation skills, but we still have some work to do, even though she's a band 80 test taker overall. Definitely, I would smooth out and pause and interrupt less frequently in order to really engage the listener, but overall quite well done. She spoke for about 1 minute and 52 seconds, so the timing is almost perfect. Nothing to worry about. Okay, so again, we've talked briefly about delivery skills. We'll examine some of those other elements again with a mind on that final element at the bottom. So we do have to analyze, did she use ideas from the listening lecture in her own words? Her transitions, again, same as before. Everything makes sense from a grammatical standpoint, but there aren't a lot of higher level transitions other than however, right? We want a little bit more variety, but overall, not bad. Vocabulary for your listening response when you're speaking to it. I think it's easier for you to speak in your own words because, again, you don't have a transcript of the lecture in front of you. So it's not possible to copy from the source. You do have the outline of notes, and maybe you'll take a few words from there, but you can see yourself all of these examples in blue of words that she's coming up with on her own. Words like oversimplify or scrutinizing or baseline knowledge. I think sometimes it's easier to paraphrase when we're not tempted to look at the source. So she definitely has done a good job paraphrasing here compared to the last response she gave us. Her opening does define economics. There's not really an introduction to this response. She just gets right to what an economic model is. So she might have added a little hook first, but at least she answers the first part of that question for sure. She does give us examples from the source, which are accurate, so it's well organized. There is a wrap up at the end as well. So she's reminding us about economic models helping us to give us the knowledge we need. So it sounds finished. Everyone's happy with that. Completes her answer to both parts and does speak for the full time. So we can understand perhaps how she's a band 80 test taker when you take all of those high level skills into account. So last but not least, let's summarize the skills we were using here before we log out. When you are working either on the reading or listening question, when you're speaking on those passages, I should say, you likely will have two parts to your question to answer. So please make sure you've identified both parts. Please make sure you're taking information from the source that address both parts. That's what you're going to take notes about. When you start to speak, it's nice to have an introductory sentence and then get right to the focus of the answer. Do try to speak for close to 2 minutes. Don't talk in circles or ramble on. We want, hopefully, as many accurate and precise details as we can from the source. within 2 minutes, maybe you can find time to add a closing statement. That would be ideal. That would really put the icing on the cake, to use a casual expression, right? Make sure it's finished. Anyway, you are going to get this as a final review in your study pack, so I won't say too much about it right now, but please be aware that there are certain skills that you should be focusing on in your prep time. We've talked about them today, and they're summarized here for you on the left. And then when it comes time to record, as it's an academic test, these are the skill sets that we have focused on today as well. And again, it would be great if you could review this before you do your own study practice next time. Likewise, you'll receive this in your study pack. So before the test, what you're doing right now is a step in the right direction. You are developing your academic English, we hope, through examples in this webinar. And hopefully you've got some other products or study habits at home that are helping you out. But one or some of the best skills you can work on yourself is definitely to develop your own sentence structure. Please make sure you're capable of demonstrating longer, more complex structures that are connected together through a good variety of conjunctions. As you've seen time and again, actually both of our speakers today were a little bit weak in that one element. So that's something that you can work on at home. Even if you're working by yourself, simply Googling transitions and conjunctions will give you plenty of example sentences. So you can do that. Your accents are fine. If you've got a different accent, that's perfectly fine. I don't want you to worry about that, but you definitely need to make sure that your pronunciation is clear. So I think if you're having conversations with other people, make sure they can understand you. And if they can't, then it's something that you know to be aware of, that you'll want to work on with your pronunciation. And there are audiobooks, etc., other tools you can use. But I think it just boils down to actual practice on a daily basis. The final step here is important. See where it says do daily timed practice sessions? Daily might be a little bit of a stretch. I know we're all busy with life and other obligations, but even if you've got a test, one of you said you've got a test coming up in a month's time. I don't know how much time you'll have to practice and study on a weekly basis, but even if you're setting aside 30 minutes every second day, the consistency of building your scores regularly is going to help you more than studying for, say, 4 hours 2 days before the test. So I think if you can work in regular practice, at first, when you develop your skills, I wouldn't worry too much about a timer. But before you take the real test, of course, you need to prove to yourself that you can speak for 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. So you are going to want to set yourself a timer like we did today in practice, to, again, with the confidence of knowing you can and have done this before as you've studied. That's going to help you develop this positive mindset when you come in to take the test. Because the more confidence you have, the more it's going to allow your brain to forge ahead without these pauses and false starts, as we call them. At any rate, all of the skills we've talked about today are going to help you on the test itself. My best advice, if you do get a complex question, or maybe you're talking and you lose track of your thoughts, it does happen from time to time. Please don't panic. The worst thing you can do during the test is, frankly, what that first female test taker did today on the graph question. Remember how she just stopped talking after about 48 seconds, and she had a whole minute and a half ahead of her. So she basically gave up. Please don't do that. Even if you're stuck, just take even 5 seconds to pause, calm your mind down, take a deep breath. Even if you have to restart with a brand new idea, as long as it's connected back to the test question, you're still demonstrating to the raters relevant content. And you're still demonstrating vocabulary and sentence structure and grammar that they can then use to get an accurate snapshot of your capabilities. So that's what you're really trying to do. In that case, if you've stopped and started, obviously the organization won't be as strong, but organization is just one piece to the puzzle. You can still use your time effectively to demonstrate other strengths. And again, I'll say it one last time, the more strengths you demonstrate across all areas of that checklist, the more likely it is you're going to earn a higher score. So never give up. If you have to just reset your mind and start fresh with a new idea, that's better than nothing. Okay, so trust your gut, trust your confidence in your studies, and put all the skills to good use. Anyway, we're just about done. If you've got any last minute questions about CAEL, now is the time to pop those into the Zoom chat. But I'll quickly remind you again of that academic success bundle we mentioned earlier today. So if you do register for your test, you can type in the code CAEL25 to earn a 25% discount as well off the cost of the test. Plus, you'll receive these free study products. A reminder that we do have other free webinars you can take. The one we just completed, as you know, is towards the bottom. It's the speaking workshop, CAEL 301. And there is another writing workshop we do. These are the two longest sessions we have. They're both 2 hours. All of the other sessions are only 90 minutes. So the CAEL 101 is an introduction, and then those other 4 green sessions will take you through each part of the test. So we currently offer about 2 CAEL webinars each month. So you can look ahead to the schedule and on the website, cael.ca, and you can find the webinars there and register so we can issue you the Zoom link and you can attend for free. On our YouTube channel, and the name of the channel is at the bottom. You see it says CAEL Official in red. So this is where we keep the recordings of all of our free webinars. So you're going to get in your study pack today a link that takes you to this YouTube channel, and it's going to open up specifically the CAEL 301 speaking webinar, since that's the one we've just finished. But you can also find recordings for all of those other free webinars on this channel. You'll also find other study series like CAEL Live, CAEL Prep with Brandy, and that's me. I'm the one in the green shirt there. And my colleague Ashwadi is the other person there in the black shirt. So these are past series we've done with lots of free instructional advice and lessons on the CAEL test. So have a look through. Likely there will be something there you can use for your study purposes. And last but not least, we do have this online bookstore. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you about the 2 free sample tests, right? 2 free CAEL sample tests. You can find them right on our website. And there's a study guide too that you can download from the website for free. And then all of these other products are available for purchase in the cael.ca bookstore. So again, 2 free practice tests, a free study guide, and then in the bookstore, we sell 11 additional practice tests. You can buy them individually or bundle them together, and the price points are listed here on screen. There is an online course that you can purchase called the Accelerate. You download that to your computer, and you've got access to this course for 6 months after the date of download. It's basically your teacher. Rather than take a class like this live, you can go through the lessons and complete the activities online too. So that's a good one. The CAEL Practice Test Plus is also an independent study product, but it's going to give you the questions and practice activities framed around the order of a particular of the test. So starting with your speaking, your reading, your listening, and so on. If you're very serious about developing academic skills, either for CAEL or just when you get to school, either way, or in the workforce for that matter, this is a textbook series called The Focus, and it's going to keep you busy for a long time because there are only 6 units, but there are more than 70 exercises contained. So everything, all elements of your speech, your listening, your reading, and your writing, you'll have practice activities and lessons here. So this is not something you do 1 week before the test. This is a product that's going to help you build your skills long-term. So I say this is for the serious academic student, this one. It's a great resource. We had fun putting it together. And there's a small vocabulary book there too that you could purchase, but I think it's just as well for you to read on a daily basis. I think if you're reading news articles, you can go to a news app online if you can stomach all the current events these days. But news articles are written in an academic tone by professional journalists and writers who know a thing or two about English communications. So I think it's a great way for you to build your own vocabulary there and also see complex examples of sentence structures, etc. But yeah, as long as you're reading academic type materials on a fairly regular basis in English, you're going to have better practice for the test too. So I'll leave you with this. There is a customer service email at the top you can see, info@cael.ca. So if you encounter issues with test registrations or just have questions you forgot to ask today, that would be the best place to go, I would say. And again, our 5 social media channels here do have free content posted on a regular basis, fairly regular. I'd say Instagram and YouTube are 2 to check out anyway, and Facebook too. If you use Facebook, we do post there regularly. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I know these 2-hour sessions, we do so much work and it takes focus to get through, but when you make it to the end like this, you can look back and see that we've accomplished a lot. And I do hope you've got several strategies now that you can keep employing at home as you continue to practice. So have a great day ahead of you, wherever you are listening from, and perhaps I'll see you back in March, I guess, for our next session. Take care. Bye-bye.